thank you for coming out. This is the first artist lecture, right? I say lecture because this is not normal for us right here to do this format. This is new. My name is Michael Dickins, and I'm the gallery director here at Austin Peay. And thanks. Thank you.
Yeah.
And for the cameras, that was Billy Wrinkle. So I'm in charge of the programming in the gallery, and I was fortunate over a year ago to kind of hook up with Carla and look at her work, and we invited her to speak anyway, to talk about her work, to be one of our visiting speakers. And we're like, well, let's see if we can work and make it happen to have the work here. So we actually partnered with Coop Gallery in Nashville. So they're going to exhibit her work tomorrow, Saturday, open Saturday. So we're going to pack up this work tomorrow, drive it down, and install on Saturday. It's going to be in the Coop Gallery for the month of Nashville. But we're like, well, if she's coming in, why don't you just ship the work to us? We can put on the show here, have a conversation with our students, and then partner up, and that's just how this worked out. Mm-hmm. So it just so happened that we had the first 2 weeks in this space available, and this wasn't planned, so we were like, let's do it. Mm-hmm. So hopefully you had a chance during the week, the past couple weeks, to come in and see it. The setup was a little bit different on purpose. The format tonight is just we're going to have a casual conversation. I'll ask a few kind of directed questions. Very briefly, brief conversation, not too much, and then we're going to open it up to you guys, and we'll just have a conversation. Does that sound good? Awesome. So let me tell you about Carla. I got to introduce her, right? So Carla Repice is, or Repice, is a first-generation Italian American born to Southern Italian immigrants post-World War II. Repice received her MFA in performance art from the School of Art Institute of Chicago, and studied painting and feminist theory at the Lorenzo de' Medici School of Art in Florence, Italy. Her work's been shown at the Equity Gallery in New York, the de Cordova Museum, Pioneer Works in Brooklyn, San Diego Museum of Art, New York Historical Society, the Radical Archives Conference in New York, Trinity Church in the city of Boston, and 5 Miles also in Brooklyn. Her art and teaching practice has been written about in Art Journal Open, The New Yorker, The Boston Globe, Hyperallergic, Art Fag City, The Huffington Post, and NPR. She was awarded residencies at Yaddo and Space at Ryder Farm in upstate New York. And she founded and was artistic director of the Bronx Art Collective, which is a nationally recognized social justice and visual arts program for high school youth at the Dream Yard Art Center in the South Bronx. She's currently the Senior Manager of Education, Engagement, and Interpretation at Bard Graduate Center in New York. And so please give it, and this is her first trip ever to Tennessee.
Yeah.
So give a good, warm Tennessee and Austin Peay welcome to Carla Repice.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. So I want to get the conversation started. If you came in during the past couple weeks, you saw you were kind of guided through, you were stopped with the wall text in the beginning. So I really wanted to encourage you to read the wall text first before entering the space. And so when entering the exhibition with the essay by Robin Walker Murphy that leads with the excerpt from the poem Strange Fruit. Strange Fruit was penned by Lewis Allen in 1937. Some of you might know it better as a recording by Nina Simone in 1965. That's where I was first referenced to it. Strange Fruit's a poem that references a photograph of mob lynching of Thomas Shipp and Abram Smith in Indiana in 1930. So I'm not sure if you're aware of this photograph if you looked it up after reading it, but the photograph, which was pretty common, were these mob lynchings where the bodies would hang, and this photograph was these two bodies were surrounded by 5,000 plus crowd of white people, right? And so it was kind of this tradition where they would take photographs, make postcards, and the people in the crowd would buy the postcards and then send them as souvenirs, right? So kind of a weird thing. Weird is an understatement. Allen equated the hanging bodies as a strange and bitter crop. But I was struck with Murphy's questions in the essay. Well, what if the strange and bitter crop are the white people in the photographs? What are the conditions of their souls? And then she asked, what is wrong with a group of people who cannot see the humanity in others? So I want to ask you these questions. So Were these Murphy's direct questions to your work, or was there a conversation that you had with Murphy that kind of spawned these questions?
Yeah. Robin and I, we worked in the South Bronx together at the Dream Yard Art Center. So she was the director of the programs and I was artistic director. And we worked really closely over the span of about 15 years. And so when I made this body of work, she came to the studio and she was like, I want to write an essay. Would that be okay? And I said, that would be amazing. So we had a conversation about the work. She was asking me some questions, but really the essay is entirely Robin. I didn't guide her in any way, but we did have some preliminary conversations.
Okay, so, but another passage too, which seems to be more direct with your work, is kind of the last question of the essay, kind of referencing W.E. Du Bois, a question he asked back in 1903 from The Souls of Black Folk. The question he asks is, between me and the other world, there is ever an unasked question, unasked by some through feelings of delicacy, by others through difficulty of rightly framing it. All nevertheless flutter around it. What does it feel like to be a problem?
Yeah.
And so this is where the white problem comes from.
Yeah, definitely. That's where the white problem comes from, and recognizing that I, as a white person and as a person of privilege, that I'm part of the problem. And so the works came out of that question, and it really a question of education. So recognizing in oneself, like, okay, so if I'm the problem, like, what are the things that I can do? Or how do I see the world? How do I respond to what I'm seeing? What is my agency in this situation? Not as like a passive person in society, but like as an active person who's trying to like create a dialogue of some kind, right? I mean, that's like ultimately painting is like you are in a conversation with yourself. So in terms of education, the work really came out of, I worked for 20 years in the South Bronx with the Department of Education and different nonprofit CBOs. And so in that time with like doing that work, seeing how the school system was setting students up, kids of color, to fail. And that the militarization of the schools, you go through metal detectors, you're dehumanized, the way the tests are set up, who's deciding the questions on the test, who's writing history, the victors write history. So it's really these questions, like over time, became so obvious to me. And myself, personally as a child, I didn't do really well in school. Like I was more a creative thinker, but like math and reading, like I was one of those kids that had to go out into the trailer and the parking lot, and like the tutors had to work with me to kind of keep up with the rest of the students. And it was like the mistakes, like I was really afraid to make a mistake. And like you have to know the right answer. Western education is all about knowing the right answer, getting the answer right, getting the right answers on the test. And that's all part of like this lineage that I wasn't necessarily connected to, but it was what was put in front of me and at what I was being like taught and indoctrinated to know. And so like the process of painting, like the process of making these paintings, it was interesting because the mistakes is where the work arose. So it was like through this process of recognition, if I recognized it, I tried to actually dismiss it or eliminate it. So the recognition process became more about the acceptance of the things I didn't know in the marks and in the process of painting and in the mistakes. So the mistakes became the work, and then this is the work that started to evolve, if that makes sense.
Right. So I'm fascinated with the education kind of, I wouldn't say slant or angle, but your focus on education system and this kind of the victors tell the stories. How many of y'all grew up public school, Tennessee? Most of you, right? So just last week there was a New York Times article that actually compared 8 textbooks. The same publisher, same exact textbook, one from California, one from Texas. They compared these two, and they highlighted the omissions or the differences in the history that was being told in Texas than it was in California, and it was fascinating. So, and I asked you to raise your hand because, yeah, in the South, and we'll get to this in a second. Yeah, we have this term, this war of northern aggression, right? And how we're talking about, I'm just going back Civil War in history, and how we're taught about this, and that, the Civil War is an economic issue. It wasn't about slavery, or, the slaves weren't treated that bad because they were provided food and shelter, and just, seeing that, in that curriculum is fascinating. And I'm going back to the South because is it with the obvious Klan imagery, right, which is associated a lot with the South, being that the Klan was born in Tennessee and then rebirthed in Georgia, but in the South. What was it important for you to show this work in the South? Is it important in the South? Does it matter that it's in the South? Or, I know you've shown this in New York. What type of reactions do you think? It's only been here for a couple weeks. You haven't really talked too much. But what kind of reactions did you get in New York? And what are you kind of expecting possibly to get here in Tennessee?
Yeah. So in New York, the response was really about the psychological impacts of the work. A lot of people were drawn into the use of color and this outline, and the fact that they were so small that it pulls you in, and also just about white violence. New Yorker, I grew up in New York. I grew up in New Jersey, right outside New York, and our school systems are some of the most segregated in the country. And so, you go from block to block, and there are schools of everyone's white, and then there are schools where everyone's black and brown, and there isn't a whole lot of mixing in our schools. And so, people understand that. And of course, my crowd that was coming to my opening, everyone's down with this work, and so we're all familiar with our politics and our activists, and probably the conversations I was having are conversations I have with these folks all the time, to some degree. So it was, I don't know about the question of what were the responses so much, but and I haven't been here long enough to know, but I did feel compelled to show the work in the South. I've never been to Tennessee. But the imagery of the Klansmen, after the last presidential election, it was just infused in my visual space. I was seeing it on the news. I was seeing it on my laptop every day. And the fact that it's like a mask, and painting is like wearing a mask. We're covering up ourselves. And how do we not do that? And also, these are the adults, and we can't see their faces. These are the people that are the leaders, right? And what are we asking of our leaders? These are really challenging questions. How do we challenge our leaders to, make change? So, I'm looking at those works in the corner there, because the pink one and the yellow one, those kind of came early on. And the girl with the red gun, she's really the person who's standing there to, she's standing there with her presence saying this is who I am now. She's right at that age where she's been gifted a gun for her birthday, right? And she's going to follow in this lineage. So how do we challenge those people that, have authority over us, and those power systems to, not to be a part of that system, but to, try to break that? I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm kind of going into a couple of the interpretations, my own interpretations, But bringing it here, what I was hoping to do is really to open it up to people, to you all, to hear what you all think of the work, because it was important to me, because as an educator, if I said I worked in the Board of Ed, now I work at Bard, and we're trying to rewrite the New York City curriculum to include freed African American slaves that lived in Central Park. That's not taught in grade 4 or grade 7 when they learn New York City history. So we want to create a curriculum and a New York City DOE mandate that history that's been totally erased from New York City is taught to every kid. So like that's what I do on my day job. Yeah. So I don't know.
So with the education, so you mentioned the guns, and I know the education system, and we're going to get into some interpretation. I'm just going to just throw this out there and just talk about it.
Yeah.
So the targets on the children, is that targets in relation to gun and gun violence, or is it targets in relation to the education system they're targeting, or the ideology that is passed down? These certain kids are targeted when they're young to believe, because hatred is taught, right? You're not born with that, it's taught. So are these targets of the future hate?
Well, for me, that painting, it's really about the guy in the background whose face we don't see, because he's standing behind that child. And so for me, like, that's the real subject in that work is, here you have this kid who's in the foreground and we see them and they have this target. Are they being targeted? Are they being taught how to shoot? Are they being taught how to shoot what? But this person who's in the back that's like masked or in the darkness, like that's the subject to that work for me. Like it's that person, the leader, who we don't see, that's like guiding this smaller person to become this adult and what they're teaching them.
Right. Yeah, when the show first opened, I had some question like, well, what is this artist's personal connection with these obviously distressed bodies? What is it, right? And so I asked Carla, like, what is that direct connection? I know you hinted at what your job is.
Yeah.
So is that primarily that direct connection that you have been in this education system in New York for so long and you've seen the trends, right? So, and is this your way of kind of hoping to bring light to those trends and show that you're trying to change, or show? I'm just trying to figure out what that personal connection is.
Yeah.
Because our students have a lot of time they want to tell these stories that they may not have a direct connection to, and we can do that through research, or we could do that for whatever. Well, let me ask you this: what advice would you give to students in telling these stories that maybe are not their own? What advice is there any advice you would have for them?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about your first question.
Sorry, I've kind of rambled on that one.
So all the imagery is found online. So I'm just looking at images on a laptop. Sometimes I'm looking at 2 or 3 at once. And I move really fast when I make them. They're small and I move pretty quick. And I'm looking at the subject matter. So, I'm painting what I see in the subject. And so the color is really coming out through that subject matter. So I work very psychologically, like as an educator, like psychology is part of like what we do. So the work, like the color, the line, the marks, the brush strokes, it's part of the psychological subject that I'm painting. So like the advice I would give, like this work is close to me in a way, because as a white person in a position of power, I'm a teacher, I'm aware of my privilege, right? And so I'm aware that in the Department of Ed, a lot of Black and brown students don't see teachers that look like them. And that's a problem. That's a real problem, that most of the people that are teachers and that hold positions of power in education are white. And so, this, like, I am that person. Like, I know I'm part of the problem. And so this is part of me that I'm painting here. So, what I do is, like, when Robin Walker Murphy left Dreamyard and I left Dreamyard, our former students are now running the Art Center, right? So the students from the Bronx went to school. They got their bachelor's, some got their master's, and now they're running the center. And so it seemed like the appropriate time to leave, right? Like, why stay? And so that's the idea that, like, the history has to be written by everybody. And so everyone has to get their voice out and get their story out, because everyone's story is really important. And the dominant history and the dominant story is not the only story, and not the only story that should be told.
Well, that's a great segue to other people's voices. I want to open it up to relevant questions about this exhibition or to what Carla's talked about so far. So if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. I am going to ask you to use your teacher voice so I don't have to walk and untether to tie. We're just speak loudly.
Yeah.
Morris.
Yeah, I'm curious, after the reception to the Emmett Till painting in the Whitney, did that have an effect on your work and your push to it?
Yeah, that's interesting. I talked with Robin about that a lot. We forgot to talk about it. Actually, so she wrote the essay. I was asked to show the work at New York Equity Gallery, and it was about a year after that biennial with the Emmett Till painting and the controversy, which I agreed with. And I was concerned how my work might get read. And I knew that there was some concern with that. So I called up Robin and I was like, should I pull some of these out? What do you think? Am I is some of this the climate is so strong right now. Should I pull some of these out? I want your thoughts. And she's like, no, because it's about the kids. And she was like, no, because it's about the kids, and I know that that's what it's about, so you should keep it all in there. And that's when we started talking about strange fruit. But I was a little concerned that it could flip, as an artist, you just don't know. And I know which ones I would be concerned about. And it's a really tricky thing. It's the how. It's how you're doing it. But it's problematic for people in privileged white spaces like myself to perpetuate violence in some way. But my work has a violence to it. So, yeah.
I have a related
question.
So, as I'm teaching African American Studies here at Austin Peay, we're using the term Emmett Till, or the name Emmett Till. In my classes. 95% of our undergraduate students don't know who Emmett Till is.
Okay.
So, can you put that into a little bit of context? Because I would imagine that there are people in this room who may go back later and look up Emmett Till, but most people won't.
Yeah. So Emmett Till was a young boy, 13, I believe, a really young boy who was murdered really brutally for a crime he really did not commit. And there are photographs of Emmett Till on his funeral, and they had an open casket because Emmett, to kind of show the world how brutally murdered this innocent young boy was, right? And what a barbaric act it was.
That's his mother's decision.
And it was his mother's decision, yeah.
Yeah, his mother's decision was to have the open casket.
Yes.
To have it photographed and to show the brutality.
To show this brutality. And, did you want me to go into the Whitney,
No,
the artist?
Just to put that in context.
Yes.
We're using that name, but with
Yes.
people have no idea.
Okay, yes.
Relates to the work.
Yes, and so none of the works, I think someone had asked if this one down on the end was Emmett Till, and it's not. It's a dead white man that I found a photo of and I felt compelled to paint. But these images are so important because they're so powerful.
And to kind of reiterate what Dr. Moore said, the artist was Dana Schutz.
Yeah, Dana
Schultz. Schutz. Dana Schutz is a Whitney Biennial 2017, I think. Could be correct.
Yeah.
So Google that, and you'll kind of read some of the article and some of the issues surrounding that. I saw another hand go up.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm curious what made you want to show this body of work about the children and targets, and then this body of work of the bodies. What's their connection, and what made you want to show this together?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so there's this almost zooming out, and then there's this zooming in, so it's showing this trajectory of these children, but then they're so frontal, they're in your face. They're really in the this body here, they're so in the foreground. And they're almost like disembodied. So it's like this fragmentation that happens from this dehumanization, like this repeated image of these faces in pain or in distortion and in agony that are part of this other larger body and system, if that makes sense. Yeah, so a lot of these come from, they're kind of like the individuals in these. We're just seeing them more frontal and very exposed. Yeah?
So I guess I'm kind of wondering, like, the source history that you're portraying in these, like, images of these children. Like, I'm kind of curious as to where, like, they're coming from, and if they're from a time period, if they're all related, or if they're just, like, kind of, just where, I guess, where's the source, like, history of your work?
Yeah. So there's no one, like, time period. I look a lot at Goya. And that's more my lineage. Like I'm looking at Goya or Marlene Dumas. But the source imagery, it's all coming from online sources. It's coming from protests. It's coming from like Getty Images. I look at locations. Like I start to like school, playgrounds, protests, and I make these folders and I just start finding source images online to respond to psychologically, and I just put these images in those folders. But it's based on locations, if that makes sense. Like I look at playgrounds really closely. I look at classrooms. I look at shooting ranges. And then I look at historical photos like Giotto's angels from the church in the north of Italy, those angels that are all in disgust, right? Like, so like that becomes this image of this, or like the Jasper Johns, like the targets, like that's an image that we're really familiar with. So I'm looking at art history, and I'm looking at images from today. Yeah. Yep.
This is a related question. I'm not altogether comfortable with how direct the question is. Feel free to decline the answer. Mm-hmm. You talked a couple of different times about the source images here and your process, but you're talking about that experience for you in sort of an academic or an intellectual way. And I would think going through the number of images that you had to go through to select these, I would think, like personally, that would be a really corrosive experience.
Yeah.
And you sort of avoided what that was, like not the work, but you. Do you want to address that?
Yeah. So like my attraction to these images, or why I'm compelled to paint these images.
Neither one. That you have to look at them.
Yeah.
A certain number of, like, what does that do to you to have to do that in order to be able to do work?
Yeah. That's a good question. Finding the image takes the longest, if that makes sense, to get the connection to the image. And I'll read like Frantz Fanon. I'll get myself into that space because it's a psychological space that I'm moving into. White people have done a really good job of portraying themselves as beautiful, and I don't see them that way. So I'm really looking at the hideous, and I have to really like undo everything from my daily life to go there. And so selecting the images takes longer than painting them, and to get myself into that process and that mood to paint. And it's through the mistakes. So it's a very like, because it's small, it's like being in a dollhouse, like it's the land of the culture of make-believe. Because I paint on a flat surface, looking down. So it's like like you're a kid, like you're in your dollhouse and you've got the power to, because this is where my power lies. Like I can make anything I want, because I can't control everything else around me. So this is where I can do something. So I'm looking down and it's small, and it's through those mistakes. So it's very uncomfortable. It's a little bit like being in quicksand, that process. So the more you move, the more you sink. And so you have to be really still and like not move to catch it. Because it's like a quick millisecond second that it's there and you see it looking back at you, and that's when you know to stop. Because you're looking for that subject to look back at you. So, you know, I'll be like, wow, that was 5 hours, or that was 6 hours on one. But like, you know, because I'm so focused on trying to get that look of that person to look back. So when I say they happen quick, it could take hours in a sitting, but when it happens, it's very accidental. I'm spilling, going through a lot of rags. It's precise in a very nonlinear way, and it's uncomfortable. I have to get myself into a very uncomfortable space, a space of not knowing. Otherwise, they look graphic, and I become graphic, and that's not what I want. So I have a lot of those. They're not here. You know, it's like those ones that I'm not quite happy with, and so I leave them there to look back at, to sort of see what I'm looking for. But it's a little bit of like that trauma, or that space of like when you see an adult yelling at a kid, or you know, you see something happen or you hear something happen, and you're like the observer and you're the maker, right? So, and then you have everyone witnessing it. So it's like all of these people at once are, I don't know if that answered your question.
But I do want to follow up. You hinted on something, Billy, that, so I'm thinking about process. So when you're looking at images, are you looking at, okay, that's a good one. Yes, maybe. I can use this one. I can use this one. When you're pulling things off online. Mm-hmm. And then is there a day where like, okay, today I'm going to paint. Now I've got to sift through these again. And which ones speak out to me to paint then? Or when you see it, you're like, I'm painting that one. I'm painting that one. But in order to get to...
That's okay.
But in order to get that collection of images that you want to hold, you also have to look at all these other images that maybe you're going to use, maybe not. But the quantity of this type of imagery, what does that do to you psychologically? Like, do you ever have any points where you're like, okay, I'm going to need to step away for a little bit, or
no,
this even makes me go harder and go stronger and get these paintings done. I need to paint to get this out of my head.
Yeah, I mean, one leads to the next. So, no. Like now I'm painting, like I read Dante's Inferno again, and his 7 layers of hell, and I'm really looking at things happening today and thinking about, you know, these 7 layers of hell in these contemporary times with everything. So I don't get tired of looking at it. Maybe I'm just a sicko. I don't know. I don't get tired of these things. I feel like the color, I think, is the antidote to some extent for me. It's that color. My work never had color ever until this body of work. So I always worked in grayscale for 20 years. And this was like the color revolution. And so I think I'm just going down that rabbit hole, and I'm not, it's not tiring. I don't get to do it enough. I have a day job. I teach. So when I'm in there to focus.
Is there another question? That's all.
Yeah.
I feel like when you're engaging with the work on this level, people are asking about how difficult it is for you to be looking at the images and painting the images and all this time spent doing this.
Yeah.
But like that's part of the white problem.
Yeah.
Is that we cannot sit in the uncomfortableness of what it means to witness the problem.
Yeah.
And to be in it and to like really engage with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the power of what's behind your work.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, and maybe like I don't know your work so well, not like 100%, but maybe more so in like the school where you taught at, where it was transferred to then the people that were actually living there.
Yeah.
I think that is maybe more powerful and more direct than this work. Maybe I shouldn't criticize so openly, but
Yeah.
yeah.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I appreciate key of engaging with this work. But I also wonder how accurately it's going to, or not accurately, but
Yeah.
in what way do the people looking at it, how can they get that information from it? Because like, there's the population that knows Franz Fanon or Robin DiAngelo, and we've studied this and we understand it, and when we look at it, we're like, oh yeah, okay, I get all these connections and the history behind it, and like the amount of energy that you're pouring into it. But then my question is like, when you bring it to like Tennessee and you put it in a student gallery, how far, I don't know, you're only getting a certain demographic in the first place, because it's people who can afford or are able to go to school, but then also like in what level of engagement are they going to be able to participate in, and how can we bring them into the dialogue? But then also I want to add, I really appreciate that this is a conversation, and that we're having a dialogue right now, and I think that's one solution to, or one like segue, I guess, into the broader conversation.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, I totally agree too. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have
It's really good observation. Yeah.
So I have one question which might lead into another depending on your response.
Okay.
Do you feel that why was the reason for you to want to share this with people? I know I heard you say earlier that, especially with the deceased man, that white people view themselves as beautiful, and you said you do not view them as such. So if these people are not beautiful, do you believe that your art would have an effect upon that? And do you believe that the artwork have even perpetuated the hatred further? Because I come from the words of black family.
Yeah.
And my aunts, my mother, always asks me if a person that I met recently and talked about is white or black. So do you think that this might instill that even further, like the white problem? There are many white people who aren't part of the problem.
Yeah.
But by adding the white problem, is that not kind of also perpetuating the idea that any race could be put underneath that same shade?
That's a really good question. Great question. I think when I was making this work, yes, it's important for me to show the work. So I strongly wanted to get this work out of my studio and out into the world to understand how it might be perceived, how it might be received, and the interpretations. And I think paintings there's a materiality to paintings, and there's a power that they have. Color also is very nuanced, and the colors that I'm using are very specific. I am looking at color in a way, like I was reading a lot of Goethe color theory at the time, but I'm not an academic either. Like I don't do things, my research isn't scholarly academic, I'm more intuitive. So my hope is that no, it's not perpetuating a problem. What it is doing is it's focusing this problem that I think perhaps some folks are not willing to look at. And that I'm saying like, hey, let's stop for a second and let's look at this. And the color is, I think, if I made this work not using this color, I don't think it would have worked. And then maybe I think it could have fallen into what you're saying, perpetuating. But I think the way I'm using color is doing the opposite, if that makes sense.
I think so. But yeah, you're kind of, and forgive me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to see if I can understand that. So you're saying like if, by saying the white problem, you could also say the black problem, right?
Well, or any amount of pointing a finger Because even though it is understandable how a group of people could feel hatred, fear, and revulsion towards the people who quite literally have demonized them and tortured and killed them for years and years and years. But even though that is understandable, it is also part of the problem.
Yeah, I understand.
But I think,
yeah, go ahead.
but
jump
sorry, I don't want to speak for
Yeah,
you,
yeah,
please.
yeah.
So
Go
if I
ahead.
say something wrong, please,
Yeah.
like, no, that's totally incorrect. But I think we as artists, we make work that's in the now, right? We make work that's in context of what's going on around us. So I'm totally going to speak for you, and only because of our conversations what we had.
Yeah.
So this is the focus on the white woman in New York that's involved in an education system that she sees as a problem. But it's not just the education, but that's a very, education, not the education system, but education in general, is where those problems perpetuate themselves. And if that is incorrect, please.
Yeah, and the indoctrination process, like how we pass down our stories, our dominant culture stories, and are indoctrinated, and like that becomes a problem. If we don't question whose story is being told, like whose story is it? Did you have a follow-up? No? Okay.
You have a question here?
Yeah.
So after this is over and you go to Nashville, what's next? Like, or wanting to go back to New York, what's next for you?
Yeah.
To help change the problem.
Yeah. So in my painting work, I'm working, like I mentioned before, it's 7 layers, 7 levels of hell, and I've got folders with different locations and psychologies that I'm working on. And that's also still, there's racism, but there's also like climate change and all kinds, kids in cage. There's still it's just January 2020 images in the news. I mean, that's literally where I started. I'm putting them in folders. And then in my work, at Bard, like I'm on the Seneca Village Advisory Board, and so Seneca Village was a freed African American village in what is now Central Park. And so before Central Park existed, freed African Americans owned land there, and they had voting rights because they were property owners. And then through eminent domain, they were kicked out and were forced to give up their land and forced to give up their voting rights. So this is a very strategic plan by the politicians. And to make way for Central Parks, so the urban planners of the city had a vision. And so there are many like archaeologists and historians that have been involved in this project. And so I run a program for young people, for teens, and so we'll get to go to the repository and look at what was excavated, like the Wilson House, the shoes and the bowls and the fragments and the glass. And we'll research these objects, and we'll also do some oral history interviews. We don't know many descendants. We're still kind of looking for descendants. And it's possible there might be a future dig, but this is all going to be compiled into like an AI project with your phone so that people can go to Central Park and learn about these sites and learn about the objects that were excavated from the park as they walk their dog, and hopefully do a Department of Education mandate for New York City history so that there's like an insert that goes into the textbook and students know about this history that was essentially erased. So it's a really extensive project, and it's going to take about 3 years, 3 to 5 on my end of what I'm doing, but I'll write the curriculum and I'll work with a lot of public school teachers, and the young people will have like a voice in that. And then I'm making paintings. So just making more paintings on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So those are my next projects. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
When you're choosing your subjects, what's more important to you, the photo or the story behind it?
A lot of times I don't even know the story. And I guess what's important, it's not the photo or the story, it's the subject, because that becomes the subject. So it's the subject matter. So it's that, those are like the principles, like the innocence, or the family that's being erased, the child that's learning to blow things up, the kids that are saluting the flag, another kid is holding this target and someone's standing behind it. It's these things, or this movement in these teeth. You can't explain it in words. That's why I'm a painter. Painting is a language in itself. So these paintings don't look anything like the actual photos. I'm transforming. I'm seeing the subject matter in the photo, and what you're seeing is the subject matter, if that makes sense. So I'm translating the photo to how I'm reading that subject. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your definition of whiteness? You said that you're a part of the problem.
Yeah.
But I guess I want to see you part of the problem because you said that you're like a first generation immigrant.
Yeah.
So if you're saying that you're like a white person in education, I mean, I want to see you as a white person in education because you wouldn't be telling like an American white story. You'd be telling like the story of an Italian immigrant.
Mm-hmm.
And like historically speaking, like white people aren't really a thing because like it's just an exclusionary tool.
Mm-hmm.
And like as whiteness is being attacked, more and more people become white. Like Gaelic people, Italian people, German people, they weren't white until like white people were running out. So how would you consider yourself part of the problem?
It's a good question. Because I know I can walk down the street and I'm not going to be harassed by an officer, but all my students will be, and I've had these conversations with Robin all the time. Like, she worries her son Ross isn't going to come home. So, and I have like students that won't come to Manhattan to my BARD program from the Bronx because their moms are worried they might get the cops will harass them or the gangs will get to them, like Junior at the bodega. Like, that's a real thing. And like, I operate in a space of freedom that other people don't. And I'm part of this dominant culture. So I see myself as part of the problem because I see what my friends have to deal with on a daily basis living in the city. We had another question in the front.
So in figure drawing right now, one of the things we're working on is learning how to put energy into a mark. It's not just a mark on a piece of paper, it has a feeling.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at your images, and I know you said they're sourced, and sometimes it's multiple pictures at once.
Mm-hmm.
But all of these have an energy that is captured that I do not feel I would be able to see myself personally in a photo. So my question for you is, how much of this energy that is in these paintings is what you see in the photo? How much of it is what you have experienced watching your students grow up, the pain that you see in them? And then how much of it is your own anguish and anger at being part of the problem?
Yeah, I think it's anger, really, that fuels the work. It's like I'm incredibly angry. And, and then you just put that anger out on these, it's pure anger of not being able to do anything other than this. So that's where the marks are coming from. The marks come from anger. Yeah.
I also work almost exclusively in grayscale, so the fact that the color is beyond me at this point. So this is more, I guess, professional interest rather than criticism.
Mm-hmm.
But do you have a process for choosing the color? Because you said you picked a specific color.
Yeah.
Have you considered stronger saturation, like Van Gogh-esque?
Mm-hmm.
And deliberately settled on more pastel
Mm-hmm.
feel?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you having some concepts and you've left those at home that are just like more bold?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. The color, you know, usually I start with black. So the way I loosen up in the studio is with ink, Chinese ink, with brushes. And I'll just move really quickly, really quickly, really quickly. And then I go in with the blacks. And there's a lot of erasing. And the color is coming from, not from the photo at all. The color, nothing to do with the photo and what is actually there. The color is coming from how I'm reading that subject, what I'm feeling in that subject. So the color is tied to the feeling, which is tied to the mark, right? So it's the feeling. And so those yellows and those reds and that lavender, like I'm mixing the colors as I'm making it. So I'm responding through color, and then I'm just going in and going, you know, and then I might do muddy, you know, because I like to keep my colors really clean, but then I get into like the mud, and then I'm like, oh yeah, like the muddy colors, because then like this is like a whole other thing. But the color comes, you know, later. It's not the first thing. I don't go in with color. The color comes at some point when I see the thing, and then I start to mix a color. And so the color is, it's you know, it's like energy. It's doing something. So I don't know. I don't think I'm consciously sticking to pastels. I'm looking for something tangible that reflects back that thing, and like the color becomes the antidote. So I think we have one more. Yeah.
Billy?
Me?
Yes, you're Billy.
I'm curious about how pointed this particular gesture is. These works, I understand they're evocative of a larger society that is educating, that is suffused with racism. But they seem also specifically about the school system as an institution that's suffused with racism.
Mm-hmm.
And you are showing them in an educational institution that is suffused with racism.
Mm-hmm.
Is that pointed?
Yeah, I think it is.
I think it was for me.
Yeah.
To bring it here.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to the Coop in Nashville, which is not an educational institution. But I felt when I saw the work and knew it was coming to Coop, I'm like, had the same thought. I'm like, well, you're talking about an education system. Let's bring it to an educational system that you just said isn't, you know, like inherently racism, right? I mean, it's like part of that problem to have that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the reasons I was interested in bringing it here.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
don't know, maybe you just, yeah, let's take it somewhere. Get it down south, and this is an avenue. I mean, I don't know. We had the funding to bring it down, right? So I was pointed for me. I don't know if it was pointed for you to make sure this is, because this is the first time it's been shown at an institution. Is it?
Yeah.
No?
Yes. It showed at a artist cooperative, like Collective Space, New York Artists Equity. Yes, I think it was pointed in our conversations that we had. And like some of the work that I do at BARD, I work with Ama Kojo, who also used to work at the Dream Yard Art Center, and she comes in and leads racial justice trainings for our students, staff, and faculty. And we are currently partnering with the HBCUs to develop summer institutes that I'm involved with. And so that work that I do at BARD and this work that I do in my studio, or what I did in the Bronx, it's all connected, right? There aren't these fractions of me. It's one project. But I would love to have a space where we could have racial justice trainings or conversations that are mediated by folks that do that work, because I think that's where you can really get to the sticky things and create a common vocabulary that everyone understands. I missed, at BARD, I missed a meeting today, and what came out of it was we talked to the diversity officer from RISD, who's a great guy. And our faculty, they want to diversify the curriculum, but they're so challenged, like they don't know how to do it. And so like it's how do we set up support and care for our students and for and information for our faculty to have the support so that they could start to do that work in their curriculum, and so that we could start welcoming everybody into our institution. So these are the challenges. These are the conversations that I think all institutions are having. Mm-hmm. I mean, you either have them or your school's gonna close down. Like, that's the bottom line. Like, our admissions is dwindling. Like, you're gonna shut down if these conversations aren't had. I think that's the future. And also museum spaces, like, we know boards of directors of every New York museum and all staff members are not diverse the way New York is. So how do we create pipelines so that people can get into those positions so that we can start decolonizing our collections, right? You were talking about that today. Like repatriation, like how do we start to really make this an everyday thing at the Met, at the Whitney, at the Cooper Hewitt, at the Guggenheim. And there are a lot of folks that are like, they want it to happen. And there are a lot of folks that are digging their heels in. So I think the people that dig their heels in are going to be left behind. That's my idea. So I think these conversations are important.
I'm going to kind of wrap it up there just for the sake of time and you guys. I really appreciate y'all coming out. Tomorrow, we're actually going to be like packing this work up. So this is kind of like the last time you get to look at the work. If you're here in the morning, I can open it in the morning, we start packing it up. We'll be here if there's any other questions you think of tonight. Like, oh, I need to ask Carla that. I'm going to swing by the gallery and see if they're packing up.
Yeah.
We'll be here.
We'll be here. Email me.
Yeah, and
visit me in New York.
Yeah, there you go. And I also have, if you're interested in having the essay, we have the PDF of it. We can send it out. I'll probably post it somewhere. But if you're interested, see me, and then I'll get it to you. So again, thank you so much for coming out. I do want to remind you next week, Jiha Moon, who has the exhibition downstairs, will be here next week. The lecture's on Wednesday at 6 in the lecture hall. And then the reception is Thursday at noon. So she'll be here doing a gallery talk there. Free food. So be sure to do that. And thank you again. And please give another warm welcome to
thank
Carla.
you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's great.